The cafeteria on Station Nexus 7 was always busy during the lunch hour. Hundreds of different species from across the galaxy came here to eat, talk, and rest between their shifts. The large room had tables of all shapes and sizes because not every alien sat the same way. Some needed tall chairs, others preferred to stand, and a few floated above their meals. Hyun pushed his cleaning cart between the tables. He had worked as a maintenance worker on the station for 3 years now. It was not exciting work, but it paid well, and he liked the quiet routine. He wiped down tables, picked up trash, and made sure everything stayed clean. Most of the aliens ignored him. Humans were common enough on the station that nobody paid much attention anymore. The lunch crowd was particularly large today. A trading ship had docked that morning, bringing merchants from the outer rim. They filled the cafeteria with strange smells and loud voices. Hyun recognized at least 15 different species just by looking around. The Threxians with their blue skin and 4 eyes, the tall thin Quilnari who moved like dancers, the rock-like Keswick who needed special reinforced chairs. Hyun was wiping down a table near the back wall when he heard it. A small sound, almost like a whimper. He stopped and listened. There it was again. It came from under one of the larger tables in the corner. He bent down and looked underneath. 2 small creatures huddled together in the shadows. They were about the size of cats, covered in gray and black striped fur. Their eyes were large and golden, reflecting the cafeteria lights. They looked at him with fear and desperation. Hyun recognized them immediately. Velkari cubs. He had seen pictures in the station database. The Velkari were one of the most dangerous predator species in the known galaxy. Their adults stood over 7 feet tall, had claws that could cut through metal, and possessed strength that made them feared across hundreds of worlds. They were not evil, but they were powerful and territorial. These cubs looked nothing like the mighty warriors their species was known for. They looked scared and very, very hungry. Their fur was dirty and matted. Their ribs showed through their sides. One of them had a small cut above its eye that had scabbed over. Hyun stood up slowly. He looked around the cafeteria. Had anyone else noticed the cubs? He watched as a Threxian family walked past the table. The parent saw the cubs and immediately pulled her children away, moving quickly to the other side of the room. A Quilnari trader who had been heading toward that section stopped, stared, and chose a different table far away. They knew. Everyone knew the cubs were there. They were just pretending not to see them. Hyun checked his data pad. He accessed the station security reports. There it was from 2 days ago. 2 Velkari adults had been arrested for smuggling illegal weapons. They had resisted arrest and been taken to the detention level. The report mentioned offspring, but said they would be handled by animal control once the proper authorities were contacted. 2 days. These cubs had been alone for 2 days. Hyun felt something twist in his chest. He looked at the cubs again. They pressed against each other, trying to stay warm and safe. The smaller one made that whimpering sound again. It was the sound of hunger, of fear, of abandonment. The cafeteria continued its normal chaos around them. Aliens laughed and talked. Food was served. Deals were made. And 2 children starved under a table while everyone pretended not to notice. Hyun understood why. The Velkari were dangerous. Even cubs had claws and teeth. Even young ones had instincts that could turn deadly if they felt threatened. Nobody wanted to risk getting hurt. Nobody wanted the responsibility. It was easier to wait for someone else to handle it, but nobody was handling it. The cubs were getting weaker by the hour. Hyun walked to his cart and pulled out his lunch bag. He had packed a simple meal that morning. Rice, grilled chicken, some vegetables. Nothing fancy. He usually ate it in the maintenance room during his break. He looked at the bag, then at the cubs, then back at the bag. He took a deep breath and started walking toward the corner table. The change in the cafeteria was instant. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The Keswick server froze with a tray of drinks in his forearms. A group of Quilnari traders turned to watch. Even the floating mist speakers paused their movement. Hyun kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. He knew everyone was watching him now. He knew they thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. The cubs could hurt him. They were still predators, still dangerous despite their size and condition, but they were also children. Scared, hungry children who had done nothing wrong except have the misfortune of being born to parents who made bad choices. Hyun reached the table. He could see the cubs clearly now. They had noticed him approaching. The larger one moved in front of the smaller one protectively, its lips pulled back slightly, showing tiny but sharp teeth. A warning. Hyun slowly lowered himself to the ground. He did not get too close. He sat about 5 feet away from the table, giving them space. The cafeteria remained absolutely silent. He could feel hundreds of eyes on his back. He opened his lunch bag carefully, making no sudden movements. The smell of food drifted out. He saw both cubs' noses twitch. The smaller one tried to move forward, but the larger one held it back with one paw. Hyun pulled out the container with the chicken. He opened it and set it on the floor. Then he slowly, very slowly, slid it toward the cubs. It stopped about 2 feet from where they hid. The cubs stared at the food. Then at him. Then at the food again. Hyun did not move. He sat quietly, his hands visible, his posture relaxed. He started humming softly, a song his mother used to sing to him when he was young. The translator device on his collar did not try to convert it. Some things worked better without words. The cafeteria waited. The cubs waited. Hyun waited. Then the smaller cub could not wait anymore. Hunger won over fear. It crept forward slowly, staying low to the ground, ready to run at any moment. Its golden eyes never left Hyun's face. It reached the container, sniffed it, then started eating desperately, tearing into the chicken with small but effective teeth. Hyun smiled. It was a start. Dae had been eating her lunch alone when the human started walking toward the cubs. She was a Xanthari biologist, one of the few on the station. Her people were known for their scientific minds and careful observation skills. Her purple skin and large black eyes marked her as different from most species here. But she had grown used to the stares. She had noticed the cubs an hour ago. Her trained eye caught the movement under the table, the slight shifts in shadow that indicated living creatures hiding. When she realized what they were, her first instinct had been to report it to security. Then she checked her datapad and saw the report was already filed. Someone would come eventually, but eventually might be too late. She had studied Velkari biology in university. Cubs needed to eat frequently at this age. They burned energy fast and could not survive long without food. 2 days was pushing the limit. Another day and they might be too weak to save. Still, approaching them was dangerous. Dae was a scientist, not a security officer. She had no training in handling dangerous animals. She had been trying to convince herself to at least try when the human maintenance workers started moving. Now she watched in horrified fascination as the human sat on the floor in front of the table. Did he not understand what Velkari were capable of? Did humans not teach their young about predator species? The smaller cub was eating now. Dae leaned forward in her seat, unable to look away. The human just sat there, humming something soft and wordless. He did not try to touch the cubs. He did not move closer. He simply existed in their space, calm and unthreatening. The larger cub watched the human intensely. Its body was tense, ready to defend its sibling if needed. But the human made no aggressive moves. He just sat and hummed and waited. Dae had studied human psychology as part of her xenobiology degree. Humans were fascinating to scientists across the galaxy. They were not the strongest species, not the smartest, not the fastest. By most physical measures, they were average at best. Yet they had spread across the stars, made alliances with dozens of species, and established themselves as important members of galactic society. One of the theories about human success was their unusual empathy. Humans seemed capable of forming emotional bonds with almost any species. They kept animals as companions. They cared for creatures that could not benefit them. They showed kindness to things that logic said they should fear or avoid. Dae had read the theories but had never really understood them. Empathy existed in many species. The Xanthari cared for their families. They formed communities. They understood mutual benefit and cooperation. But what the human was doing went beyond that. He was risking himself for creatures that could hurt him, that belonged to a species he had no connection to, for no logical reason at all. The smaller cub finished the chicken. It looked up at the human, then back at the larger cub still hiding. It made a small chirping sound. The larger cub's ears twitched. Slowly, carefully, it began to move forward. The cafeteria remained frozen. Dae looked around and saw expressions of shock on dozens of faces. A Threxian mother had her hands over her children's eyes. A group of Keswick traders leaned forward, their rocky faces impossible to read but their body language showing intense interest. The larger cub reached the container. There was still some food left. It ate quickly but kept glancing at the human, watching, waiting for the attack that humans in the wild would surely make. But the human did not attack. He pulled something else from his bag, rice in a small container. He opened it and set it down, pushing it gently toward the cubs. Then he pulled out vegetables. Then a piece of bread. He laid out his entire lunch in front of them. The cubs ate everything. They were so hungry they did not fight over the food. The larger one even pushed some of the rice toward the smaller one, making sure its sibling ate enough. Day found herself standing. She did not remember deciding to stand. Her legs had simply moved on their own. She picked up her data pad and walked toward the human and the cubs. Other aliens shifted nervously as she passed. A Quilnari reached out as if to stop her, then pulled back. The floating mist speakers formed a tighter cluster, their way of showing concern. Dai approached slowly, following the human's example. She stopped about 10 feet away and crouched down. The human glanced at her and nodded slightly. His face was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. He was not as relaxed as he appeared. The cubs had finished eating. They looked less desperate now, though still too thin. The smaller one was licking its paws, cleaning itself. The larger one watched both the human and Day carefully. Day spoke quietly, her translator converting her words to standard galactic language. You know what they are, it was not a question. The human nodded. Velkari cubs, you know they are dangerous? Yes, then why? The human looked at her with brown eyes that seemed both tired and kind. They are children. They are hungry. What else would I do? Day had no answer for that. In Zinthari society, one would call for proper authorities. One would wait for trained professionals. One would not risk oneself for creatures outside one's own species, especially not predators. But she found herself saying, they need more food and water. Velkari cubs need a lot of water. The human smiled. Can you get some? I do not want to leave them right now, Day stood. She walked toward the food service area, aware that every eye in the cafeteria was tracking her movement. Behind the counter stood a human woman with a name tag that said Suji. She was already preparing food. You saw, Day said. Suji nodded. She was putting together plates of protein-rich food. Hard to miss. That is Hyun. He has a good heart. She paused. Sometimes too good. He is going to get in trouble for this. Why would he get in trouble for helping? Suji looked at her with an expression Day could not quite read. Station regulations. Those cubs are supposed to be contained until Velkari authorities arrive. Hyun is interfering with security protocols. He could lose his job, but he is helping them survive. I know. Suji finished preparing the food and grabbed several bottles of water. That is why I am helping too. If we both get fired, at least we get fired for doing something right. Dae followed Suji back toward the corner. More humans had started to gather, not close to the cubs, but forming a loose circle around the area. A human male in an engineering uniform, a human female who looked like a trader based on her clothing, an older human man who wore the insignia of Station Technical Services. They did not speak to each other. They just stood there watching, protecting. Suji knelt down near Hyun and set down the food and water. The cubs immediately moved toward the water. They drank desperately, water dripping from their small muzzles. Thank you, Hyun said quietly to Suji. You are an idiot, Suji replied, but her voice was gentle. A good idiot, but still an idiot, Hyun smiled. Probably. The smaller cub finished drinking and looked up at Hyun. Then it did something that made the entire cafeteria gasp. It moved closer to him, just a few inches, but closer. It pressed its small body against his leg and closed its eyes. The larger cub tensed, watching its sibling. When nothing bad happened, it slowly relaxed. It too moved closer, though it kept watching the crowd. Hyun very slowly, moving like he was underwater, reached down. His hand hovered over the smaller cub's head. Then he gently, so gently, touched its fur. The cub made a sound, something between a purr and a hum. It pushed its head into his hand. Day felt something strange in her chest, an emotion she did not have a name for in her own language. She looked at Suji and saw tears in the human woman's eyes. What is happening? Day whispered. Suji wiped her eyes. Something humans are good at. Maybe the only thing we are really good at. We make friends with things that should scare us. We care about things that cannot help us back. We love the unlovable. Day looked at the cubs, at Hyun, at the other humans standing guard. She pulled out her datapad and began recording. This needed to be documented. This needed to be understood, because somewhere in this moment she knew something important was happening, something that would change how she saw humans forever. Commander Taewon had been in his office reviewing supply reports when the call came through. A situation in the cafeteria. Potential danger. Human involved. He sighed and grabbed his jacket. It was always something on this station. He was human himself, which sometimes made his job harder. Other species expected him to excuse human behavior or show favoritism. He tried not to. He had worked hard to earn his position as station security commander. He followed regulations strictly, treated all species fairly, and maintained order above all else. But sometimes humans made that difficult. They did things that made no sense. Things that broke rules for reasons that seemed stupid to other species, but somehow made perfect sense to other humans. When he reached the cafeteria, he expected a fight, or maybe an accident. What he found instead made him stop in the doorway. A crowd had gathered in a circle near the back corner. The room was mostly silent, which was unusual for the lunch hour. Everyone was watching something. Taewon moved through the crowd. Aliens stepped aside to let him pass. He could see the tension in the room, the nervous energy. When he got to the front of the circle, he understood why. Hyun from maintenance was sitting on the floor. 2 Velkari cubs were curled against him, one on each side. He was stroking their fur gently while they ate from containers of food. Suji from the kitchen was there too, sitting nearby with more food and water ready. Taewon's first instinct was to order everyone back, to call for containment units, to handle this by protocol. Those cubs were listed as dangerous animals pending transfer. Hyun was breaking at least 5 station regulations, but Taewon had been in security for 20 years. He had learned to read situations quickly, and what he saw here was not danger. The cubs were calm. Hyun was calm. Even the crowd was more curious than frightened now. He noticed other humans in the circle. Jiwon, the trader, Mia from engineering, a few others he recognized from around the station. They were not doing anything obvious, but their positions were deliberate. They had formed a protective ring, bodies angled to block the cubs from view of the more nervous aliens. They were guarding, not the crowd from the cubs, but the cubs from the crowd. Taewon made a decision. He tapped his communicator. "Security team, stand down. I am handling this situation personally. No need for additional units." "Sir, the protocols," his second officer began. "I am aware of the protocols. Stand down." He walked forward slowly, keeping his hands visible. The larger cub looked at him and tensed. Its small claws extended slightly. Hyun noticed and started humming again, that wordless sound that seemed to soothe the cubs. "Hyun," Taewon said quietly, "you know this is against regulations." "Yes, sir." "You could be fired for this." "Yes, sir." "You could be hurt." "These are predators." "They are children, sir." Taewon crouched down, still keeping his distance. He looked at the cubs. They did look pitiful. Too thin, dirty, scared. He had read the report about their parents, smugglers caught with illegal weapons. The adults had fought security and were now in detention. The cubs had been deemed a problem for later, but later was now. And nobody else had stepped up. "How long have they been alone?" Taewon asked. Day, the Xanthari scientist he recognized from the research level, spoke up. "According to station records, 47 hours since their parents were detained. Have they been fed in that time?" "Not according to any official records." Taewon felt anger rise in his chest. 47 hours. These cubs were maybe 6 months old in Velkari development? They should have been fed every few hours at that age. Why was this not handled? He demanded. An uncomfortable silence fell over the cafeteria. Finally, a Keswick security officer spoke up from the crowd. His rocky voice was defensive. "The protocols say to wait for proper Velkari authorities. We contacted them. They are coming. We were told not to approach the cubs because of danger. So you just left children to starve? They are not children. They are animals. Dangerous ones." Taewon stood up. He was not a large man, but he had presence when he needed it. "They are cubs of a sentient species. That makes them people under galactic law. Children. You left children to starve because you were afraid." The Keswick officer had no response to that. Taewon looked around the cafeteria. "Is there anyone here who attempted to feed these cubs before this human did?" Silence. Hundreds of aliens and not one had tried. Is there anyone who reported their condition as an emergency? More silence. Taewon turned back to Hyun. The maintenance worker was still sitting calmly, cubs pressed against him. The smaller one had fallen asleep. Its small chest rose and fell with each breath. What you did was foolish, Taewon said. It was dangerous and against regulations. Yes, sir. It was also brave. And kind and right. Taewon tapped his communicator again. This is Commander Taewon. I am officially taking custody of 2 Velkari cubs found abandoned in the station cafeteria. I am designating them as wards of station security until proper authorities arrive. I am also assigning human maintenance worker Hyun as their primary caretaker under my direct supervision. Sir, the regulations... His second officer tried again. I am updating the regulations. These cubs are now under official protection. Anyone who wants to argue can file a complaint with Galactic Child Services. Taewon out. He looked at Suji. Can you prepare appropriate food for Velkari cubs? High protein, easily digestible? Already on it, sir. Good. He turned to Minho. Engineering. I need a temporary habitat set up. Somewhere safe and comfortable for the cubs until we can transfer them properly. Can you handle that? Minho nodded. Give me 2 hours. You have one. Taewon looked at Jiwon. Traitor, I saw you working your datapad. Tell me you were doing something useful. Jiwon smiled. I contacted the Velkari diplomatic vessel. Explained the situation. They are altering course. They will be here in 3 hours instead of the 2 days we were originally told. How did you convince them to hurry? I told them human station security was currently caring for their cubs. They seemed very interested in that. Also possibly concerned. They are bringing a full diplomatic team. Taewon almost smiled. Of course they are. He looked back at Hyun. Can you carry them? Hyun looked uncertain. I can try, but I do not want to scare them. We need to move them somewhere safer than a cafeteria floor. Dae spoke up. I have a research lab on level 7. It is quiet, private, and I can monitor their health properly. If they are to be moved, that would be the best location. Taewon considered this. A Zenthari scientist offering to help. He had not expected that. But then he had not expected any of this. All right.
Hyun, can you get the cubs to follow you to the lab?
Hyun looked down at the cubs. The smaller one was still asleep. The larger one was watching him with those big golden eyes. He started to move slowly, shifting his position. The larger cub tensed but did not pull away. Come on, little ones, Hyun said softly. We are going somewhere safer. Somewhere better. He stood up carefully. The smaller cub woke and made a distressed sound. Hyun bent down and, moving very slowly, picked it up. The cub allowed it, though it looked uncertain. The larger cub stood too. It looked at its sibling in Hyun's arms, then at the crowd of aliens watching. It moved closer to Hyun's legs, pressing against him. They began to walk. Hyun moved slowly, carrying one cub while the other walked beside him. The crowd parted to let them through. Some aliens looked amazed. Others looked confused. A few looked ashamed. Suji gathered up the remaining food and water. I will bring more to the lab. Taewon watched them go. The other humans followed, still maintaining their protective formation. It was instinct for them, he realized. They saw someone vulnerable and they protected. They saw someone hungry and they fed. They saw someone alone and they offered companionship. It was not always smart. It broke rules sometimes. It caused problems, but it was who humans were. And watching Hyun walk through the cafeteria with 2 deadly predator cubs trusting him completely, Taewon felt something unexpected. He felt proud to be human. He tapped his communicator again. All security teams, this is Commander Taewon. Effective immediately. I'm updating our protocols regarding abandoned or distressed aliens on this station. No sentient being, regardless of age or species, is to be classified as just an animal or a problem for later. We help first and worry about regulations second. Anyone who has a problem with that can transfer to a different station. There was a pause. Then his second officer responded. Understood, sir. New protocols acknowledged. Taewon followed the group toward the lifts. He had reports to file, explanations to write, and probably some very angry messages from station administration to deal with later. But that could wait. Right now he had 2 cubs to protect and 1 very brave maintenance worker to support. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing were not the same. Today Taewon chose right. The research lab on level 7 was quiet. Day had cleared out most of her equipment and set up a comfortable space in the corner. Minho had brought cushions, blankets, and set up proper heating lamps. The cubs needed warmth, especially after being cold and underfed for so long. Hyun sat on the floor with both cubs curled in his lap. The smaller one was asleep again, finally feeling safe enough to truly rest. The larger one was awake but relaxed, its head resting on Hyun's leg while he stroked its fur gently. Suji had brought enough food to feed a dozen cubs. She kept checking on them every 30 minutes, bringing fresh water and different types of protein. Day monitored their vital signs with her medical scanner, recording everything in her datapad. Their body temperature is normalizing, Day said quietly. Heart rates are steady. They are dehydrated still, but improving. Hyun nodded. He looked tired. He had been sitting with the cubs for over 2 hours now. Commander Taewon had tried to get him to take a break, but Hyun refused. He said the cubs trusted him and he did not want to break that trust by leaving. Taewon stood by the door monitoring station communications. The Valkyrie diplomatic vessel was making good time. They would arrive in less than an hour now. He had already prepared his report, explaining the situation as clearly as possible. He expected consequences for breaking protocol, but he could live with that. Jiwon sat nearby, working on her own datapad. She had been researching Valkyrie customs and culture, trying to prepare for the meeting with the diplomats. What she found was interesting. Did you know, she said quietly, that Valkyrie consider the care of young to be sacred? Not just their own young, but any young. It is one of their strongest cultural values. Taewon looked up. I did not know that. It is in their oldest laws. Anyone who harms or neglects a cub faces the harshest punishment in their society. But anyone who protects a cub, even one not their own, is given the highest honor. Jiwon paused. What Hyun did, taking in abandoned cubs and caring for them, that is something the Valkyrie will not forget. Dai was listening too. So they will view his actions positively? More than that. They will view it as noble. Valkyrie respect strength, but they respect compassion more, especially compassion shown to the helpless. Hyun was not paying attention to the conversation. He was focused on the cubs. The larger one had started making a soft rumbling sound, something like a purr. It was a good sign. It meant the cub felt safe. Hey, little one, Hyun said softly. You are going to be okay. Your people are coming. They will take care of you properly. The cub looked up at him with those golden eyes. Hyun could see intelligence there. These were not mindless animals. They were young people capable of thought and feeling. They had been scared and alone, and now they were learning to trust again. It made him angry when he thought about it. How had the station let this happen? How had so many people walked past these cubs and done nothing? He understood fear. The Valkyrie were dangerous, but these were children. There had to be a way to help that did not require ignoring basic decency. Minho returned with more blankets. The diplomatic vessel is 20 minutes out, he announced. Commander, you should probably know they are bringing a full security team and 3 high-ranking officials. Taewon nodded. Expected. They want to make sure we handled this properly. Did we? Minho asked. We saved 2 cubs from starving. I would say yes. Suji came over with a bowl of warm broth. Try to get them to drink some of this. It has nutrients they need and it is easy to digest. Hyun took the bowl carefully. He dipped his fingers in it and held them near the larger cub's nose. The cub sniffed, then licked his fingers. Its rough tongue tickled. Hyun smiled and moved the bowl closer. The cub began to lap at the broth. The sound woke the smaller cub. It lifted its head, sniffed, and immediately tried to get to the bowl too. Hyun held the bowl steady while both cubs drank. Some of the broth spilled on his uniform, but he did not care. You are making a mess, he told them gently. But that is okay. You need to eat. Day watched this interaction carefully. She had recorded hours of footage now. This would be valuable for her research. But more than that, it was changing how she thought about things. She had always believed in logic and proper procedure, in following established methods. That was how science worked. That was how society worked. But watching Hyun with these cubs, she realized there was something beyond logic, something humans seemed to understand instinctively that her people did not. Sometimes you did not help someone because it made logical sense. You helped because it was right, because they needed help and you could give it. It was that simple and that complicated at the same time. The door to the lab opened. Commander Taewon straightened immediately. A group of Valkyrie entered, and everyone in the room tensed. The Velkari were impressive in person. They stood over 7 feet tall with powerful builds and thick gray fur marked with black stripes. Their eyes were golden, just like the cubs, but larger and more intense. They had retractable claws on their hands and feet, currently visible. Their faces were somewhere between feline and canine, with strong jaws and sharp teeth. The lead Velkari wore formal diplomatic robes in deep blue. She was female, Hyun guessed, based on the lighter build and the pattern of her fur. Behind her came 3 others, 2 wearing security armor and 1 in medical robes. The diplomat looked around the lab, taking in the scene. Her gaze fell on Hyun sitting on the floor with both cubs. The cubs had noticed their own kind and were watching carefully but had not moved away from Hyun. The diplomat approached slowly. She stopped about 10 feet away and lowered herself to one knee, bringing her height closer to Hyun's level. It was a gesture of respect, Hyun realized. "I am Kayla," the diplomat said. Her voice was deep and slightly growling, but her translator converted it to perfect standard language. "These are my people's cubs." "Yes," Hyun said simply. "You fed them." "Yes." "You protected them." "They needed help." Kayla looked at him for a long moment. Then she made a gesture with her hand, touching her chest and then extending her hand toward him. Jiwon gasped softly. "That is a sign of deep respect," Jiwon whispered to Taewon. "She is honoring him." Kayla spoke again. "Our cubs were abandoned by circumstance, neglected by this station, left to suffer. You, a human we have never met who owed us nothing, chose to help them." Why, Hyun thought about how to answer that. He looked down at the cubs, still pressed against him, still trusting him. They were scared and hungry. "I had food. I could help. That is all." "That is all," Kayla repeated. She looked at the other humans in the room. "This is what we have heard about your kind. That you care for things you should not care for. That you protect things that cannot protect themselves. That you show kindness where others show only fear." She stood and addressed Commander Taewon. "We were told the cubs were being held in containment. We expected to find them in cages, possibly sedated, treated as dangerous animals. Instead, we find them fed, warm, and in the care of someone who clearly loves them." Taewon stepped forward. "Sir, I must apologize for the initial neglect. Our protocols failed. These cubs should have been cared for immediately." "I take full responsibility," Kayla shook her head. "You corrected the failure. That matters. But this human, Hyun, he acted before you corrected anything. He did not wait for permission or orders. He simply helped." The Velkari doctor approached carefully. "May I examine them?" Hyun nodded. The doctor knelt down and began checking the cubs gently. She spoke to them in the Velkari language, soft growling sounds that the cubs responded to. They seemed relieved to hear their own language, but they did not leave Hyun's side. After a thorough examination, the doctor stood. "They are malnourished and dehydrated, but they will recover fully. Someone cared for them well in the past few hours. They would not have lasted another day without intervention." Kayla looked at Hyun again. "In our culture, the care of cubs is sacred. To care for another's cubs, to protect them as your own, this is the highest honor one can show. You did this for strangers, for a species not your own." She made another gesture, this one more complex. She touched her chest, her forehead, and then extended both hands toward Hyun. Jiwon's voice was filled with awe. "That is the highest honor a Velkari can give. She is naming him a friend of their people." Hyun did not fully understand what that meant, but he could tell it was important. "I just did what anyone should do." "But others did not," Kayla said. "Only you, and these cubs will remember. We will remember." The smaller cub finally moved. It stood up and walked toward Kayla on unsteady legs. The diplomat knelt again and opened her arms. The cub went to her, making soft chirping sounds. The larger cub followed, but it stopped and looked back at Hyun. "Go on," Hyun said gently. "That is your family. They will take care of you now." The larger cub walked to Kayla but kept glancing back at Hyun. Even as the diplomat held both cubs, comforting them in their own language, they watched him. Kayla noticed. "They have bonded with you. That does not happen easily with Velkari cubs. They remember who saved them." She stood holding both cubs carefully. They were small in her large arms, but they fit perfectly. She looked at all the humans in the room. "You have shown us something today. You have shown us that humans understand what it means to protect the helpless. This will not be forgotten." She turned to Taewon. "We will file an official report with the Galactic Council, praising 3 days had passed since the incident in the cafeteria. Life on Station Nexus 7 had mostly returned to normal, but something had changed. Something subtle but important. Hyun returned to his maintenance duties, pushing his cart through the station corridors as he always had. But now aliens nodded to him when he passed. They said hello. A Threxian merchant had given him a small gift, a token of respect from her people. A Quilnari trader had bought him lunch. Even the normally reserved Keswick workers made way for him in the halls. He was uncomfortable with the attention. He had not done anything special, at least not in his mind. He had just fed some hungry cubs. But everyone else seemed to think it was remarkable. The cafeteria had changed too. Someone had installed a plaque on the wall near where he had sat with the cubs. It was small and simple, written in standard galactic language. In this place, a human showed compassion to the helpless. Let all who enter remember that kindness knows no species. Hyun had stared at it for a long time the first time he saw it. Then he went back to cleaning tables. But he noticed that aliens sat near that spot more often now. Parents brought their children there and told them the story. It had become a gathering place, a reminder. Commander Taewon had received official commendation from the Velkari government. The entire security team had been recognized for their handling of the situation. But the largest honor had gone to Hyun. The Velkari had sent him a formal declaration naming him Friend of the Pride, which Jiwon explained was an incredibly rare honor usually reserved for Velkari heroes. Hyun kept the declaration in his quarters. He did not know what it meant in practical terms, but it felt important. In her lab, Day had been working non-stop. Her recordings of the incident had been sent to xenobiology departments across the galaxy. Universities wanted to study them. Scientists wanted to understand what had happened. How had a human bonded so quickly with predator cubs? What was the mechanism behind human empathy? But the more Day studied it, the more she realized it could not be fully explained by science. There was something in humans that went beyond simple biology. An instinct to care, to protect, to help. It was not logical. It did not always benefit them. But it was deeply, fundamentally part of who they were. She had written a paper about it. In her conclusion, she had written something that would have shocked her professors. Perhaps some things cannot be measured in data. Perhaps some truths exist beyond logic. Humans possess a capacity for compassion that defies standard evolutionary explanations. They help those who cannot help them back. They protect those who might harm them. They care simply because something needs care. This is not a weakness. This is their greatest strength. The paper was already being discussed in academic circles. Some agreed. Some thought she had gone soft. But nobody could argue with the footage. Hundreds of aliens had stood by and done nothing. One human had acted. Suji had received a promotion. The station had officially recognized her contribution to the cubs' care. She had turned the cafeteria kitchen into something more than just a food service. She had started an initiative to ensure no one on the station, regardless of species, went hungry. She coordinated with medical teams to identify beings in distress and provided meals to those who needed help. It had grown bigger than she expected. Other aliens had volunteered to help. Not just humans, but others too. The Zenthari scientist Day, some Quilnari traders, even a few Keswick workers had joined in. The incident with the cubs had shown them something. It had shown them that helping was possible, that kindness could be stronger than fear. Jiwon had received communications from a dozen Velkari trade groups. They all wanted to meet with her, to discuss business relationships with humans. The Velkari government had opened new diplomatic channels with human territories. The cubs' rescue had done more for human-Velkari relations than years of formal negotiations, but more importantly, it had changed how other species viewed humans. Before, humans were seen as useful but unremarkable. Average fighters, decent traders, good engineers. Nothing special. Now they were seen as something else. The species that cared, the people who would help when others walked away. The ones who showed compassion even when it cost them. Minho had started receiving requests from other species asking about human customs. How did humans think? Why did they act the way they did? What made them willing to help strangers? He found himself becoming an informal cultural ambassador, explaining human nature to curious aliens. He told them about human history, about how humans had taken wolves, dangerous predators, and turned them into companions, about how humans kept animals as pets even when those animals served no practical purpose, about how human children often cared more about a lost kitten than their own safety. We are a strange species, he would tell them. We love things that should scare us. We help things that cannot benefit us. We form bonds with almost anything. It is not always smart, but it is who we are. On the fourth day after the incident, Hyun received a video message. It was from Kayla, the Velkari diplomat. She appeared on his small screen, and behind her he could see the two cubs. They were bigger already, healthier, their fur shining and clean. Friend Hyun, Kayla began. I wanted you to see the cubs. They are well. They eat properly now and play with their cousins. They are happy. The cubs on screen noticed something and ran toward the camera. The smaller one made chirping sounds. The larger one pawed at the screen. They remember you, Kayla said, smiling. Every day they look for you. We have told them you are far away, but they are young and do not fully understand. I thought perhaps seeing you would comfort them. Hyun felt his throat tighten. He smiled at the screen. Hi, little ones. I am glad you are safe. The cubs reacted to his voice. They made more sounds, excited and happy. The smaller one actually tried to climb through the screen to reach him. Kayla gently pulled them back. We have decided to name them in your honor. The Velkari tradition is to name cubs after those who saved them. The smaller one we have named Huni, the larger Terran. Terran means from Earth in our language. They will carry these names and remember who saved them for their whole lives. Hyun did not know what to say. He had never expected this. I am honored. It is we who are honored. You showed us that kindness exists even in the cold spaces between stars. You reminded us that protecting the helpless is the most important duty any being can have. We will not forget, the message ended. Hyun sat in his quarters for a long time thinking. 2 cubs had names now because he had shared his lunch. 2 lives had been saved because he chose to act when others did not. Was it really that remarkable? To him it still felt like basic decency, but maybe that was the point. Maybe what humans thought was basic was actually rare in the galaxy. That evening, Hyun went to the cafeteria for dinner. As he walked in, he saw the plaque on the wall. He saw the aliens gathered there telling their young ones about what happened. He saw humans and non-humans sitting together, talking, sharing meals. Commander Taewon was there with his security team. He waved Hyun over. Sit with us. Hyun joined them. The table was mixed, humans, Zenthari, Kilnari, even a Keswick. They were talking about station security protocols, about the new procedures for helping distressed beings. They were making real changes based on what happened. You know, Taewon said, looking at Hyun. I have been thinking about what you did, about why you did it. And I realized something. You did not think about regulations. You did not worry about danger. You did not consider the consequences. You just saw someone who needed help and you helped. That simplicity, that directness of compassion, that is something special. Dee nodded. She had joined them at some point. Her datapad is always in hand. I have been studying human psychology for months now. I thought I understood it, but I was wrong. Understanding and truly knowing are different things. I understand now why humans have succeeded in the galaxy. Not because you are strong or smart, but because you care. And caring, really caring, is the rarest resource in the universe. Suji brought over food for everyone. Stop praising him so much. His head will get big. But she smiled as she said it and ruffled Hyun's hair affectionately. Hyun ate his meal quietly, listening to the conversation flow around him. The group discussed plans, shared stories, made jokes. It felt good. It felt like family, even though most of them were not even the same species. Later, as he prepared to leave, a young Kilnari approached him shyly. She was a child, maybe 8 years old in their development. She held out a drawing. I made this for you, she said quietly through her translator. Thank you for showing me that different is not scary. The drawing showed a human stick figure sitting with 2 small creatures. They were all smiling. It was simple, childish, but beautiful. Thank you, Hyun said, taking it carefully. I will keep this forever. The child smiled and ran back to her parents, who nodded their thanks to him. Hyun walked back to his quarters, holding the drawing. He passed aliens who smiled at him, who nodded respect, who thanked him. It still felt strange. He still did not think he had done anything special, but maybe that was exactly what made it special.
He had not helped the cubs because he wanted recognition.
He had not done it for honor or reward. He had done